Hi everyone, this is Erica Rubino, Registered Dietitian over at All Nations Health Center. Today I am planning on making some beans so that I can eat during the week for a meal prep. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making dried beans. And so I just have dried pinto beans, and now these have been soaking for a few hours since this morning. And I have about 3/4 of a pound. And that's because it's just for myself for this week. So I didn't want to make too much, but I also wanted to make enough for me to be able to use in multiple meals this week. And so for today, we are going to have dried pinto beans that have been soaking. You do not need to have them soaked. I just like to. They break down a little bit easier and they're easier to digest for anybody who has trouble eating beans or any other really, really high fiber foods. We will be making this, or I will be making this in the Instant Pot using the slow cooker function. I used to have a slow cooker, but then I got rid of it when I got the Instant Pot because there is an option to use a slow cooker here. You can pressure cook your beans this way if you want, if that's how you've done it before. I personally have enjoyed it slow cooked because I think the flavors come out a lot better. So I'm going to do that. So in here, I just have water. I have my beans. This recipe, it's not really a recipe necessarily where I have it written down. At a previous job, I used to work with a lot of coworkers who are from Mexico, and I got to learn how to make really, really, really delicious Mexican food. And so this is a recipe that one of my coworkers taught us. Her name is Terry, and she's wonderful. So it's a rendition of her recipe. Now, whenever we made these beans, it never came out as delicious as hers because she just has this magical touch. So this is Erica's version. So we have the beans. I have water in here, and usually I would use some sort of broth, for example, vegetable broth or beef broth. I only have chicken broth for this one. I'm using the Better Than Bouillon because that's what I have in my fridge. If you have veggie broth, that probably would be a little bit better with this recipe. So I'm just going to mix this in here just to get the water to be very, very flavorful. We are going to be using salt. We have some cumin for great flavor, some paprika. These are just extra. You don't really necessarily need them. Bay leaves. I love putting this just like 1 or 2 in there just for extra flavor. We have our garlic here, a good chunk of onion, our olive oil, and one of the magical ingredients is going to be lime juice, and we're going to put this in towards the end. And then we're also going to be using diced jalapenos that they're canned. So they're nice and pickled, so they have this like great little tangy, briny flavor to them. If you have diced chilies, that also works great. I just personally like the jalapeno better. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to get the broth going. We're going to add in the beans, and then we're going to season this broth with, like I said, the cumin, the paprika, the bay leaves, the salt, the pepper, the garlic, and then we're going to put in a bunch of onion in there, and a little bit of the jalapeno or the chili, whichever one you're using. We're going to let that slow cook for, I'm not exactly sure how long this will take since it's been soaking. It might take just like 4 or 5 hours. It might take longer. What I usually do is I keep checking on it just to see that it's not disintegrating. And then at the end, before we're about to serve, I'm going to add in a bunch of tomatoes. I only have 2 here, but I'm going to probably add more. A little bit more onion, just to have that extra flavor. And then I'm going to add in cilantro and more of that lime juice. And to me, that's personally where you get that amazing, amazing flavor. And I love to eat these beans just over rice or brown rice if I have it, or if you want to make refried beans with it, or if you just want to eat a bowl of beans. This is a fantastic recipe because you don't need, there's not too many ingredients, and they're pretty inexpensive as well. So just so you guys know, I just bought this at the grocery store. It's a 1-pound bag of pinto beans, and I used 3/4 of it. So that's how much is in this recipe. It makes quite a bit, so just keep that in mind. Like I said, the beans were soaking. I'm going to now put in the flavor for my for the broth. Now, I don't really have exact measurements on this because just don't. I'm going to try my hardest to give you guys some somewhat of an exact measurement so you can try making this at home. But you know, I feel like a lot of us have our own recipes for beans, and this is just another way to do it. So you guys can see this. I'm going to move the ingredients kind of out of the way so you can see the chopping going on. So I'm going to use quite a bit of onion, but I'm going to save a good chunk for after the beans are cooked. And that's just because when I've made this recipe multiple times before, what happens is the onions disintegrate quite a bit. And I really like the onions to kind of have a little bit of texture when I'm about to eat them. So I'm going to leave half. And I'm doing this right now. I'm going to add the onions right now in order to give this broth extra flavor, because then the beans are going to soak up all of that liquid and then have that flavor like inside of them. So that's what I want to do. So this one's a pretty a huge onion actually. This is about half an onion. If you have a medium-sized onion, you could probably do half of that to start with. And I'm just going to chop it up. Just so you guys know, I'm not special or anything. The only reason I'm not crying while I'm doing this is because I have contacts on. But this would be painful to do without any. So now I'm going to add this to my water that I already put or the broth, if you have broth. I'm going to leave the rest here. And I'm just eyeballing it. And this is kind of what it looks like right now. And now I'm going to add the beans. So here's the thing to keep in mind. I really like to make this recipe so that I get a pretty good amount of liquid to the amount of beans that I have in here. What you don't want, and this is what happened to me last time, is I put too much liquid in here. I had too much of everything else and not enough beans. So then the recipe was diluted. So I'm going to, looking at it right now, I think there's actually too much water for the amount of beans. I'm going to remove just a little bit just to make sure that I have that right proportion. This is just kind of eyeballing it. And I'm trying to just remove the water without the onions coming with them because I want the onions to stay in there. But if you like your beans less liquidy, less brothy, I would do the same. But if you like your beans to be very, very liquidy, almost like a soup, then by all means keep that liquid in there. I think that's pretty good, actually. Okay, I'm just going to put this back in here just to make it a little bit easier for me. Okay, so now we're going to do garlic. And I'm sure you guys have noticed from our last cooking sessions, I love garlic, so I would probably be adding a little bit more if I had more, but I don't. If you have garlic powder, this would be a great time to add it. You do not need fresh garlic. You can easily use garlic powder. You would just be careful that you're not using garlic salt. And if you are, just make sure you're not adding a bunch of salt in addition, because that will make it pretty salty. If we're trying to be mindful of our blood pressure or any diabetes that we might have, pre-diabetes, or you're just trying to limit salt for whatever reason, be careful with the garlic salt. Okay, so just chopping it, adding it in there, and that was about 5 or 6 cloves. Knowing me, I could probably add more. Okay, so next we're going to do the bay leaf. I'm going to probably just do one big one. This just depends on your preference as well. Bay leaves can be pretty strong in flavor, so that's why I don't really want to add too much. I'm going to look for a relatively big one. Yeah, these are pretty small. I'm going to do 2 small ones. I'm just going to do these 2. I am going to kind of crunch them up a little bit so to have more surface area to float around. Put that in there. Again, you can do whatever you like with this recipe. If you want to put more, by all means, please put more. I'm going to add in cumin. How much? I'm not exactly sure. So I'm just going to add it in, and you can kind of see me just sprinkling a little bit in here. I will say, and I think I've said this before, whenever you're cooking, you can always add more at the end, but you can't subtract. So if you're not used to using these seasonings, add a little bit, and at the end, you can always just add a little bit more to get to the flavor you want. Next, I'm going to do paprika. I like my stuff pretty strong, so heads up on that. And then I'm going to do some black pepper. And then salt. I'm going to go easy on the salt, though. And I have a little there for my salt. Because I prefer to add more later. Because the worst thing is overly salted dish that you can't do anything about. So it looked like I put a lot in there. There really wasn't that much. Mix it in. And now I'm going to add the jalapenos. Okay. So like I said, these are pickled, which is wonderful because they have this extra flavor. You can totally use fresh. You just don't get that bright, that like the liquid that's in there. That's what gives it a lot of the flavor. So that's why I like to keep this. This is also super duper cheap. And I try to always keep one in at home because I like to use it for a lot of different things. And I love this flavor, so I'm going to add a good chunk of it. So those 2 spoonfuls. Oh my gosh, that smell is so good. Just kidding. I'm going to add one more. I really like this stuff, you guys. Okay, let's see. I'm going to add my olive oil. We don't need to worry about this one too much, but I personally really love it. And then for the lime juice, I like to add the lime juice mostly at the end, just because, as we talked about before, a lot of acidic things like lemons, limes, vinegars, they kind of brighten up the flavor. So it almost makes things taste saltier without having to add salt, which is like one of my favorite things. And I love acidic foods. So I'm going to put just a little bit in here right now, but I'll probably add more later. I'm just going to roll this out. And this is just to kind of get the juices going a little bit easier. This is an enormous lime. My hands are pretty small, but this is pretty huge. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit. Okay. And now I will say I always forget something in this recipe, but I'm hoping I'm not going to forget it this time. I'm just going to mix this in here and show you what it looks like. Here's where we're at. So we have beans, broth, bay leaves, onions, paprika, cumin, salt, pepper, diced jalapenos, a little bit of lime juice. And now I'm going to let this cook. So I'm going to probably start out with about 4 hours because I'm going to do this as a slow cooker just because I like the flavors a little bit more. If you wanted to do this as a pressure cooker, doesn't have to be an Instant Pot by any means. You absolutely can. It's just going to take way less time. If you are going to pressure cook it, I would highly recommend that you do soak the beans first just to make that go a little bit faster. And I'll have to look up the numbers for you guys, and I can put that in the recipe as well in case you're interested in that. And I'll just keep checking. And then I'll come back and show you guys what it looks like later. Once this is finished cooking and I'm like, this is exactly the consistency I want, I'm going to chop up tomatoes. I'm going to use more of this onion. And then I'm going to chop up a bunch of cilantro. I'm going to add that in. So then when I'm eating this, it's really like, it's pretty heavy on the vegetables, which is what we want, right? So then you'll have pinto beans, and then you'll have a bunch of onion and tomato. And, you know, my goal whenever I'm making any of my foods is if there's a way that I can add vegetables just to kind of increase that nutrition, increase that, that fiber in there, I will do it. By no means am I saying that you have to do that. This is just how I like to do this recipe. And I love beans. They're so versatile. They are high in protein. They're a plant-based protein for anybody who is trying to limit their meat intake. They have so much fiber. They're high in iron. They're just great foods. So I highly recommend it. So I'm going to get this going, and then I'll come back to show you what it looks like later. And then once I add all the extra stuff in there.